Good morning once again. If I could have your attention. I usually, at this event, I usually like to walk around and greet different tables, but it seemed like the hum of conversation was so productive and meaningful that I didn't want to interrupt that, and that's a good thing. Really glad, gentlemen, that you had an opportunity to meet some of our alumni, and this room actually is important in the life of the history of Fordham Prep. So it's good that we change up our scenery, and we're not doing this in the Leonard Theater Light where you usually have your assemblies, because this is the room where we have our Hall of Honor induction every other year. And so hopefully we'll be seeing you back here for some of those events in the future. You're also used to more having, in the past, having Dr. Petriello address you. And so now having me address you is a little bit different as well. But that also represents the shift in your role, moving out of the life of a student into the life of an alumnus at Fordham Prep. You've heard since the 9th grade that you will always have a home at Fordham Prep. This is the sense of belonging that we wish to create for you, and we believe we have during your 4 years. And the alumni sitting at your tables, they can testify to this sense of home, and they're back to welcome you into the broader community of the Fordham Prep Alumni Network. This is a network that, believe it or not, will support and assist you as you go through college and beyond. This weekend, I had the sad duty of celebrating a funeral mass for the mother of the member of the class of 1974, Bill Mulrow, and his mother was 96. So there weren't many friends of hers that were there at that funeral. It was very small. It was just the family. But Bill wanted to make sure that his classmates were represented. And so there were about 5 members of his class who were there. So after all those years, that sense of belonging, that sense of community endures. Now, you might not think of the Fordham Prep Alumni Network as relevant to you now as you graduate from high school and head to college, but trust me, in the future, your fellow Rams will be there to guide and shepherd you through your professional career. These are people you should reach out to, and already I've had alumni in college email me, contact me, and say they're looking for summer internships. Could I put them in touch with alumni in the areas and sectors in which they'd like to work for the summer? So that type of activity happens all the time informally, and this is an opportunity for you to think about that. Hopefully you'll return to this memory of being at this breakfast in the future, and you'll realize that the bonds that you have remain for life. One of the characteristics of a Fordham Prep alumnus, graduate at graduation, is that he is open to growth. He's someone who is willing to adapt as his circumstances change. This being open to growth, being flexible, goes all the way back to the life of Ignatius Loyola. And another one, also imbued in the life of Ignatius, is intellectual competence. So that's another characteristic of the graduate at graduation, which you will be in a few weeks. Today's speaker exemplifies both of these characteristics as he journeyed through his career as a bookseller, editor, and writer. Jim Mustich is a 1973 graduate of Fordham Prep and a 1977 graduate of Princeton University. After graduation, he began his career in bookselling at an independent bookstore in Briarcliff Manor, New York in the early 1980s. In 1986, he co-founded the acclaimed book catalog, A Common Reader, Books for Readers with Imagination, and he served as its president and publisher. During its publication, the catalog was published up to 17 times a year and listed hundreds of titles in each issue, and each having its own dedicated summary. At its peak, the Common Reader sold over 300,000 books a year. That publication ceased in 2006. Mr. Mustich opened to growth in his own career, then started a new venture and became the founding editor of the Barnes & Noble Review, an online literary journal where he conducted in-depth interviews with leading authors. In 2017, he went from the written medium to a spoken one as the founding executive producer of the Barnes & Noble podcast, where he conducted audio interviews with leading writers. And then in October 2018, Mr. Mustich's book, 1,000 Books to Read Before You Die, A Life-Changing List, was published, and it received starred reviews from Publishers Weekly, Booklist, and Library Journal, and it was listed as one of the 50 best nonfiction books of the year by the Washington Post, described as, quote, the ultimate literary bucket list. We're pleased to have Mr. Mustich back with Fordham Prep. He served as a trustee several years ago, and so we congratulate him certainly on his book and also on the fact that in probably about 6 weeks' time, he will be a grandfather for the first time in his life. So I'm proud to introduce to you today our speaker, Mr. Jim Mustich.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here today. Thanks to Father Deverin for inviting me to speak this morning, and congratulations to the senior class for the approaching milestone of graduation. I don't know what you did to deserve to spend this lovely morning listening to me and the other alums at your table, but for my part, I'll try to make it as painless as possible. And it'll be about 13 minutes and 11 seconds in case you get antsy. In full disclosure, I had prepared different remarks from what you're about to hear, filled with wonderfully entertaining anecdotes about my own time at the prep. But when I reread these over the weekend, I realized that all the people I was being wonderfully entertaining about have either gone on to their eternal reward or have been so long retired that you seniors would have no idea whom I was talking about. In fact, I believe the only teacher I've shared with you is Mr. Jack Foley, who I saw before out in the foyer. When I first met Mr. Foley, he was a fleet and ingenious Ajax, young bulwark of the classics department. And across the decades that I've known him, including a stint together on the Board of Trustee, he has metamorphosed into a venerable nestor of both classical learning and institutional traditions. Any seniors who can trace those Homeric allusions to their sources should see Mr. Lauber, who has special prizes for you. This September will mark the 50th anniversary of my first appearance as a student on the Rose Hill campus with my friend Bob Cicero there, also class of '73. 50 years is a long time, but I still remember distinctly that first morning and my very first class. It was held in a decrepit classroom on the 4th floor of Hughes Hall, a building that has since been transformed beyond imagining, and which I now understand is the sparkling hub of the university's Gabelli School of Business. Back in our day, it had a somewhat different vibe, which is perhaps best summed up by the fact that scenes from the 1973 horror film The Exorcist were shot in a room just down the hall from the classroom in which my life as a prep student began. I will let that piece of history pass without additional comment and refer you to the theologians in the room for further explanation. But suffice it to say that you have passed through a somewhat different Fordham Prep than I did, if not in essence, at least in physical plant and curricular program. And the broader landscape of education off the Rose Hill campus has changed even more than the prep has. One of the larger differences resides in the hysteria around college admissions, which you have recently enjoyed, that has gripped the country in the intervening years. And that might offer perspective on what hasn't changed about Fordham Prep and Jesuit schooling more widely since my graduation in 1973. For core to the mission of both, then as well as now, is the idea that an education should be built to last a lifetime, rather than be merely a stepping stone on the path to getting into college, and that this lifelong learning is meant to inform a presence in the world that will be measured by more than grades or salary or credit score or bank account. This has proven to be true in my case, and I hope it will prove true in yours. In the New York Times about a month ago, the columnist Frank Bruni published a column with the title, "The Moral Wages of the College Admissions Mania," in which he writes of some of your contemporaries who have been trained to other standards and shaped by other values. For these kids, education isn't an opportunity to wring more meaning from life and make a more constructive impact on the world. It's transactional. It's performance. If the right audience doesn't clap, there's no point in even taking the stage. When I read this column, I thought of a letter I had written on the occasion of his 80th birthday to a legendary prep teacher and my mentor at the prep in the very first year that mentor groups replaced homerooms here, Arthur McCormick. I began the letter with a quotation from a book called The Seven-Story Mountain, one of the works I write about in 1,000 Books to Read Before You Die. Its author is Thomas Merton, who was an enormously talented writer, possessed of a bohemian temperament and a searching mind. He retreated from the world in his early 20s, giving his spiritual restlessness a forbidding and yet ultimately liberating destination, a Trappist monastery in Kentucky. From the solitude of the Abbey of Gethsemane, he paradoxically attracted worldwide celebrity, becoming an esteemed and at times controversial advocate of peace and social justice. His fame was initially spread by the popularity of The Seven-Story Mountain, which was a bestseller in 1948, and chronicles the life that led up to his conversion to Catholicism and his retreat into the cloister. The quotation with which I began my birthday tribute to Mr. McCormick was this: "The logic of worldly success," Merton writes, "rests on a fallacy, the strange error that our perfection depends on the thoughts and opinions and applause of other men. A weird life it is indeed to be living always in somebody else's imagination, as if that were the only place in which one could at last become real." I sent these words to Mr. McCormick by way of thanking him for helping me to develop the resources to become, for better or worse, real in my own imagination, and to live there in the years since adolescence as vividly as my lights have allowed. Some such imaginative vitality should be the goal of any education, but in most circumstances, that's clearly not the case, as Frank Bruni's observation of many of today's most accomplished students reveals. If the right audience doesn't clap for them, they see no point in even taking the stage. While I wrote that letter to Mr. McCormick, I could have sent it to several other of my prep teachers, or indeed to the school generally, in gratitude for my having learned in its community that learning itself was not a transactional enterprise, which is the first lesson one needs to master in recognizing that life, at its richest, is not a transactional enterprise, but in essence, a spiritual exercise. Its output not best tallied in diplomas or dollars or Instagram likes or professional titles, but in far more fundamental measures like faith and hope and love. Now, to engage in spiritual exercise, one must maintain a certain level of fitness. Which brings me to other words of Thomas Merton, also found in Seven-Story Mountain. "Souls are like athletes," Merton wrote, "that need opponents worthy of them if they are to be tried and extended and pushed to the full use of their powers and rewarded according to their capacity. Now that you are about to leave Fordham Prep and the benevolent, mostly, dominion of its Jesuit influence, You might ponder that sentence. Where will your soul find opponents worthy of it? Where will you find experiences that will push you to extend and push your spirit to the full use of its powers and reward it according to its capacity? It won't be by getting into college, and it's unlikely to be in the workplace, as rewarding, productive, and lucrative as that arena may prove. And it almost certainly won't be in the society digital technology is remaking for us, rendering our lives into predictable patterns with a power that becomes more frightening with every convenience it delivers. We live in an age of algorithms in which all of human experience is subject to rules of engineering efficiency. That's marvelous and can be liberating in many ways. It's convenient to know with a few keystrokes that this lovely room in the Botanical Gardens is 1 hour and 7 minutes from my home in New Fairfield, Connecticut, and to have the quickest route mapped out for me. But as useful as it is, would we want to run our lives by the equivalent of a GPS, where we always know what the next step is, but lack a wider sense of where we are and where we might be going? Where we're saved from the fear of getting lost by sacrificing our freedom to find our way? In the technological mindset, optimization is often privileged over all other qualities of engagement or experience, in a way which can be dangerous when it is shaping not just our driving routes, but our news, our political perspectives, our very sense of what's what. The need to make every element of experience definable, which is a prerequisite for optimizing digital experience, can lead to an intolerance of ambiguity that doesn't interpret life as well as it interprets roadmaps. Because the most important experiences in life are not efficient. They are almost always ambiguous in one way or another, and they're never simply optimizable. Think of it. Infancy isn't efficient, nor is growing up, nor is raising children. Education isn't efficient, and is less and less education in its true sense, the more it pretends to be efficient. And whether or not you've found out yet, falling in love isn't efficient, and falling out of love even less so. In fact, thinking is seldom efficient, nor are the revelations we come to about ourselves in the world by living, pondering, and worrying until we learn to be comfortable in our own skin. The life of the Spirit is not efficient, and no app is going to map your soul for you. That's work you have to do for yourself, reflecting on truths, looking hard in the mirror, embracing and being embraced by those you love. Maybe even reading and reflecting upon a few of the 1,000 books I write about in mine. Life is not a problem that can be solved, but a mystery to be greeted with welcome and with wonder. And a soul is not something to be saved by efficiency or enriched by transactions, but something to be inhabited with reverence, nourished with curiosity and compassion, and furnished with the wisdom and kindness that learning seeds and love can bring to flower. As you venture forth from Fordham Prep, keep front of mind the things I hope you've been able to take for granted here. The blessings of teachers, the enduring power of knowledge, the force of friendship, the many facets of faith, and the reality of your soul, the living truth that you have one. No matter how elusive it may sometimes feel, nor how much the material world may seem intent on ignoring it. Accept the challenge of life as a spiritual exercise and seek out the competition that keeps you fit for it. Avoid falling into what the philosopher Gabriel Marcel called crispation, the constricted sense of life that grows from our reliance on habits and small-minded attachment to possessions and familiar comforts, As though, Marcel wrote, each one of us secretes a kind of shell which gradually hardens and imprisons him. So don't get crispy in heart or mind or spirit. Challenge your days with learning and with love to make what Jesuit teaching calls the magis your animating principle, so that you may grow each year more thoughtful, more generous, more brave, more alert to the world's wonders, and more pained by its inequities, more wise, more kind. Thank you.